What's up, y'all? It's been almost 2 years since I made a video, and a lot has happened since the last video I uploaded. I've just been really busy. But anyway, I thought I'd revive this channel and give y'all some content today, so here we go. Since it's been such a long time, I don't know if I'll get any views, but we'll see what happens. Today's video is going to be a bit different. You know, my channel usually delves into the ancient and prehistoric record, but this time, we're going to analyze some modern, radical black history. You know, because I want this channel to cover a more diverse range of topics and actually engage with matters of socio-political significance. So I'm going to discuss the rise of the Black Power movement in the British context and the eventual creation of the British Black Panther Party. Why, you might ask? Well, when we think of Black Power and the Black Panthers, our minds immediately jump to the Black liberation struggle within the American context, and because of this, we often forget about the ways in which this very struggle manifested in other parts of the world, especially Europe. So I want this video to emphasize the historical causes and significance of the Black Power struggle in Britain, while also acknowledging the praiseworthy accomplishments of the British Black Panthers. In essence, by creating this video, I hope to deviate from American-centric historical analyses of the international Black Power movement.
Our problem has been, as black people, we've always been concerned about white America, never about us. And what we've always thought is that white America equal the same interest as us. That is not true.
In the hot summer of 1967, Ekwueme Ture, the leader of SNCC and one of the most prominent leaders in the American Black Power movement, traveled to London as part of an international tour. A speech he made at the Dialectics of Liberation Congress during his time in London is widely regarded by scholars and activists alike as the catalyst of the British Black Power movement. At the center of Ture's speech was the call for blacks to not ignore their blackness by assimilating into white society. He called on his people to demand equality through blackness and hence negotiate on their own terms. He emphasized the need for black people across the world to attain self-determination, i.e. an existence which is free from colonial exploitation and hence characterized by social, political, and economic autonomy. This rhetoric, in conjunction with his condemnation of the white state apparatus, inevitably appealed to the disenfranchised masses of black Londoners. Black people in Britain wanted a radical philosophy, a radical approach to liberation, and Ture provided them with the seeds for just that. Furthermore, Ture imbued his speech with an internationalist ideology which argued that the black struggle must be united across the world. For Ture, the struggle for racial equality was a transnational one, so it was not simply confined to the Western world. Ture said that, quote, "Black people see themselves as a part of a new force, sometimes called the Third World, that we see our struggle as closely related to liberation struggles around the world." End quote. This transnational African diasporic identity brought black people in Britain into the ranks of a militant global majority which shared a history of colonial subjugation and anti-colonial resistance. Furthermore, Ture delineated the ways in which capitalism egregiously exploits the black working class, and he thus argued that the Black Power movement must be anti-capitalist in nature. He eloquently conveyed how international white supremacy is driven by the economic exploitation of black peoples throughout the global south. He placed the repression of black peoples within a historic context, explaining how the capitalist powers of the West commodified and exploited black bodies through slave labor, and subsequent to the abolition of chattel slavery, continued to repress the black working class by exporting its capital abroad, and hence exploiting cheap, underpaid labor within the global south. So, Ture provided an indispensable explanation of the economic roots of black disenfranchisement across the world. Throughout the 1960s, black people were encouraged to immigrate to Britain, a nation that was depicted as a source of opportunity and advancement, kind of like the way in which the United States was and has always been depicted. But as these migrants arrived on the island, reality quickly sobered them up. In this nation, they were used as another source of cheap labor, which only expanded the wealth of the white elite. The post-war economy thus witnessed a racialized division of labor on the UK mainland. Black and brown workers were forced to occupy the bottom rung of the labor market regardless of their previous class trajectory, as white male workers moved into higher paid skilled manual roles, which were designed to maintain white hegemony in the workplace. Furthermore, British society's racism against non-white citizens had also resulted in de facto color bars in workplaces and unions, and racial discrimination in housing and policing. Hence, black peoples existed as a permanent underclass within Britain and faced the brunt of race-based economic exploitation. This class-based analysis that underpinned the Black Power ideology of Ture was well suited to the British context, as Black Britons related to the economic oppression Ture was referring to. The impact of Ture's speech was immediately felt. Writing in 1971, Ogi Ekwueme, a Black Power figurehead in Britain, described Ture's visit as being, quote, like manna from heaven. And he argued that, quote, it was not until Kwame Ture's historic visit in the summer of 1967 that Black Power got a foothold in Britain, end quote. Within a week of his speech, the UCPA, the Universal Colored People's Association, had expelled its white members and adopted the ideology of Black Power, and Ture was actually banned from Britain entirely. The ideology of Black Power saturated Britain, and hence led to the creation of numerous Black Power organizations, such as the United Colored People's Association in 1967, the British Black Panther Party in 1968, and the Black Unity and Freedom Party, otherwise known as the BUFP, in 1970, and the Black Liberation Front in 1971. It is important to note that other lesser-known Black Power groups were present in urban areas such as London, Manchester, and Birmingham. Evidently, the British Black Power movement was heavily influenced by its predecessor in the US, as various groups required their members to read the works of Eldridge Cleaver, Angela Davis, Huey P. Newton, Kwame Ture, and others. Yet although this overlap existed, British Black Power resonated beyond the British African/Caribbean community, as Ture's words in the Dialectics of Liberation conference highlight. It was an inherently transnational movement closely entwined with the liberation struggles of the Global South. This marks a clear distinction between the Black Power movement in the British context and the Black Power movement in the American context. The quintessential tenet of the British Black Power ideology was the notion of political blackness. Proponents of political blackness argued that the common experience of colonial rule and subsequent state racism in the UK united the members of the African, Caribbean, and Asian migrant communities as black peoples. For instance, the UCPA referred to its members as black brothers and sisters from Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, and the Americas. Even the more Afrocentric Black Liberation Front defined black people as, quote, all non-white peoples of African, Asian, Caribbean, and Latin American origin who share the common enemy and common oppressor, end quote. Therefore, the Black Power movement altered the notion of blackness in Britain, turning it into a politicized concept which transcended the confines of race and was hence attached as an identifier to all those who were barred from whiteness. Furthermore, it served as an identity that could entwine the various struggles of all non-white peoples who sought to overturn colonialism, racism, and capitalism. This approach differed greatly from that of the Black Panthers in the United States, as this organization was Afrocentric and upheld a solely race-based concept of blackness. South Asian anti-racist groups, such as the IWA or Indian Workers Association, embraced political blackness due to the British state's homogenization of all new Commonwealth citizens. South Asians were, for instance, demonized as the ultimate religious and cultural other to Britain's white Christian population. The scholar Robbie Shilliam describes how South Asian Commonwealth citizens were, quote-unquote, blackened, meaning that the state perceived them through the trope of the black slave, which posed a socio-cultural threat to the modern nation. In essence, South Asians and their African diasporic allies were deemed to be dangerous to the quote-unquote preservation of the English way of life. Although the concept of political blackness sought to unite the struggles of Asians and black peoples alike, this did not stop black power groups from attending to specific forms of racism suffered by distinct racial and ethnic groups. For instance, more Afrocentric organizations such as the Black Liberation Front promoted the ideology of Pan-Africanism, and other groups campaigned against the police brutality faced by those within the African diaspora. Yet not all black and brown peoples embraced black power. Black power groups were predominantly made up of Afro-Caribbean and Asian Caribbean activists and contained far fewer African and Asian activists. Furthermore, black power publications were also Afrocentric in focus, leaving Asian imagery and history unrepresented. So although they had their flaws, the accomplishments of these various organizations are straight up noteworthy. Black Power groups led grassroots community campaigns and institutional initiatives against racist immigration controls, police brutality, discrimination in the workplace, housing and education, and the threat of racial violence on behalf of all of Britain's non-white communities. Although small in number, with some groups composed of the tens rather than the hundreds, Black Power organizations were often able to mobilize hundreds and thousands from wider local and national communities for rallies and demonstrations. As Angelo notes, quote, "The rate of activism by groups such as the BPM was high, with the staging of over 100 protests between 1969 and 1973 and over 70 cultural events during this same period." Oh, and that's another thing to note. The Black Power movement produced magnificent art. The art from this movement is worthy of its own separate video. One of my favorite works from this time is a poem called "England is a B-Word." Can't say it because I'll get demonetized. By Linton Kwesi Johnson. I'll play a clip for it right here.
When me just come to London town, me used to work pon the underground. But working pon the underground, you don't get to know your way around. England is a bitch. There's no escaping it. England is a bitch. There's no running away from it. Me get a little job in a big hotel, and after a while me was doing quite well. Them start me off as a dishwasher, but when me take a stock, me not turn clock watcher. England is a bitch. There's no escaping it. England is a bitch. Nobody try to hide from it. When them give
In April 1968, Obi Ekwueme, a Nigerian-born novelist and Black Power activist, called the United Colored People's Association annual general meeting 6 months earlier than planned, resigned as chairman, and founded the British Black Panther movement, which advertised itself as a revolutionary socialist group. Ekwueme decried the UCPA's lack of understanding regarding Black Power's meaning and hence formed his own organization, borrowing the term Black Power and related symbols from the US Black Panthers. He insisted that the movement had to be ideologically coherent and, unfortunately, masculine because, in his view, quote, "The secret of the Panthers' success to date, even if limited, lies in this instance, that the movement must be a fraternity of brothers of strictly identical ideological orientation." So, just like the Panthers back in the United States, the ones in the UK suffered from male chauvinism as well. Ekwueme's ideology intertwined the Marxist-Leninist tenets of class struggle with a racial analysis of discrimination and white supremacy. In a scathing criticism of the white labor movement, he claimed, "I cannot see how any man who calls on workers to unite because they are oppressed as workers could deny men of color the right to unite when they are victimized as men of color." Although the Panthers in Britain shared the same title as their US counterparts, these two organizations did not operate under the same leadership, and their ideological orientations differed in some ways too. For instance, unlike the US Panthers, the British Panthers cut ties with the white left entirely and embraced cultural nationalism. Ekwueme insisted that the white Marxists, quote, "with their usual presumption that only they have read Marx, persist in deriding Black Power as narrow, nationalistic, and un-Marxian," end quote. He believed that the British Panthers should remain independent from sympathetic whites because white liberals always enjoy, quote, "a certain degree of security from the system of society," end quote. This approach differed from the US Panthers' view that coalition with whites was indispensable to the success of the revolution. While the US Panthers denounced the central Black Power tenet of cultural nationalism as romantic and ineffective, the UK Panthers sought to saturate the African diaspora with what they termed quote-unquote black consciousness through meetings that showcased poetry, music, and film from the West Indies and West Africa. The British Panthers' interest in the arts mirrored the Black arts movement in the United States as it showcased a nascent Black British identity and fit well with the founding of the Notting Hill Carnival, an annual 2-day street festival celebrating Britain's West Indian community in 1966. In similarity to the US Panthers, the UK Panthers militantly opposed police brutality, and one London court case in 1970 exemplifies the inherent antagonism that existed between the UK Panthers and the police. On August 9th, 1970, a Black Panther group in London organized a protest which condemned, quote, the white racist system's use of their police force to invade the places where black people frequent, end quote. In this particular case, the Panthers were opposed to the aggressive policing of the Mangrove restaurant in Notting Hill, a popular rendezvous point for black radicals. A coalition of 150 protesters marched through the community toward Notting Hill, Nottingdale, and Harrow Road police stations to, quote-unquote, expose the racist brutality that black people experienced at the hands of the police. The police brutalized many of the protesters, arresting 19 of them and charging them with assault, possession of an offensive weapon, and incitement to riot. 10 defendants' charges were soon dropped, but support swelled for the other 9 accused, who became known as the Mangrove Nine. The Mangrove Nine trial began in October 1971 and captured a significant amount of media attention. During the trial, Black Panthers and their allies frequently demonstrated outside the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey. On the last day of trial testimony, police turned over a leaflet called Battle for Freedom at Old Bailey to Judge Edward Clark, who believed the leaflet might be in contempt of the court. The leaflet argued that a biased judge and jury skewed the proceedings of the case against the Mangrove Nine, claiming that, quote, the case has been a systematic exposure of police lies, the ways in which the prosecution, having no evidence, tries to play on the prejudices of the jury, of the way in which the judge plays the part of chief prosecutor, attacking and obstructing the defense, end quote. After a 4-month investigation, the officer P.J. Palms concluded that the police lacked sufficient evidence to identify the authors of the leaflet, which, quote, in any event might be ill-advised at this stage as likely to exacerbate racial feelings, end quote. In the end, Judge Clark dropped the contempt of court charge, and later in 1971, he acquitted the Mangrove Nine. The British Panthers harnessed their community's resentment of the police and channeled it into a critique of state repression and institutionalized police violence. In the Battle for Freedom leaflet, Mangrove Nine supporters insisted, quote, the police of that area in London had for years harassed and brutalized the people of Notting Hill. The Mangrove restaurant, one of the nerve centers of the community, had been raided without reason several times. Evidence in the trial showed how high the resentment of the brothers and sisters, both defendants and witnesses, against this constant unchecked brutality was, end quote. In similarity to the American Panthers, the British Panthers emphasized the importance of armed self-defense and asserted that they were willing to confront police when necessary. They argued that weapons were central to their definition of black power. Quote, only when the most oppressed sections of the world are totally liberated will it be possible for the oppressed peoples to lay down their arms, end quote. Thus, like their US counterparts, the British Panthers also carried weapons. Given stricter gun laws in the United Kingdom and the relative inaccessibility of guns compared to the US context, the Panthers appear to have only carried knives and other melee weapons. Along with their emphasis on self-defense, the Panthers, in similarity to their US counterparts, prioritized community welfare endeavors. For instance, they established an organized activities program for West Indian teens at the Oval House. Despite the differences between the American Panthers and the British Panthers, the latter stressed a shared black identity with the former. British Panthers recognized the intersectional relationship between the growing American Empire and decaying British colonialism, and hence noted that black people in the United Kingdom and America were oppressed by the same structural entity. Therefore, the black struggle within both nations was recognized as one united effort. The British Panthers repeatedly compared their social treatment to that of African Americans, demonstrated connections between the two groups, and, as mentioned before, appropriated various aspects of the US Panthers' form of resistance. In fact, when the British Black Panther Keith Spencer was asked why he supported the American Black Panthers and advocated for the freeing of Bobby Seale, the chairman of the American Black Panther Party, he said, quote, I am always angry as far as black people are concerned, end quote. Therefore, the British Black Panthers recognized the internationalism which underlied the black struggle, The British Panthers insisted that the imprisonment of Seal and the general repression of black American radicals was part of an international Western policy of suppression targeted at blacks everywhere. One of their flyers stated, quote, "Remember, America dominates and so controls Britain economically and even politically. America controls our homelands in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. Therefore, American suppressive policies, fascism, and international murder plots concern all of us." End quote. By recognizing U.S. hegemony, the Panthers formed a shared African diasporic identity, asserting that the imperialist United States oppressed black people globally and was hence the common enemy. The British Black Panthers revealed these global networks of oppression to the masses and thus re-articulated the necessity of revolution. The Panthers claimed that the revolution against capitalism, imperialism, and colonialism must be led by the working class and must hence recognize the dialectical relationship between race and class. Ambalavener Sivanandan, I don't know if I said that correctly, but I'll put the name right there for you to see. A librarian and later the director of London's Institute for Race Relations explained, quote, "Black power in particular spoke to me very directly because it was about race and class both at once. More than that, it was about the politics of existence." End quote. Throughout their existence, the UK Panthers insisted that their struggle was transnational. Ekwueme claimed, quote, "We do not dream for one moment that the black people in Britain can organize themselves as a unit totally separate from other black forces in the world. Black power is an international concept." End quote. In similarity to the American Panthers, the British Black Panther Party existed under extensive state surveillance by the Special Branch's Black Power Desk. The British state sought to end the Black Power movement and imprison its leading figures. Eventually, the British Black Panther Party collapsed amid infighting, power struggles, biased courts, and numerous forms of state-directed sabotage. Therefore, this organization faced the same fate as its American counterpart, falling victim to brutal state repression. In 1973, the British Black Panther Party was unfortunately liquidated entirely. The British Black Panther Party is often forgotten, but it played a momentous role in Black British history. This organization served to entwine the working class, black power, and anti-colonial movements into one cohesive struggle for liberation. We should never forget their fight, a fight which continues to this very day.
We have breakfast for children because we teach the people through practice, through observation and participation, that people can be fed free. That's the people thing. Socialism is the people. You're afraid of yourself. If you're afraid of socialism, you're afraid of yourself. We know they have our pictures. We know they're looking for us. We know they want us. But we're still saying that even though we could be in a sense, as far as this system goes, on the mountaintop, we in the Black Panther Party, because of our dedication and understanding what's in the valley, knowing that the people in the valley, knowing that we originally came from the valley, knowing that our flag is the same flag as the people in the valley, knowing that our enemy is on the mountaintop, our friends are in the valley, we say even though it's nice to be on the mountaintop, we're going back to the valley.